Welcome to In the Center of Her Power podcast, where you can get divine feminine soul food. The divine feminine is re-establishing itself in the world, and you need tips and tools to make it your own. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. Did I say it was free? It's totally free. You don't have to pay anything to get started. There are creation tools, and you can edit and trim the end. You can record. There's intro music that you can use. It has so many really cool features that I really needed as I was starting to podcast. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So go download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM and get started. Go ahead, download, get started. Let your voice be heard. Hello, everyone. This is Sanaa Green. Welcome to Center Her Power podcast, or In the Center of Her Power. That's what this podcast is about. It is about allowing you opportunities to see women who are living, breathing, and standing in the center of their power. I have been away for a while. I kind of got caught up in doing some other things. Actually, I got kind of stressed. I got stressed as I was trying to launch new things, and I have some property that I manage, and things happen with that. And I became worried. And as I became worried, I realized that diminished my immune system. And so I ended up getting COVID. I had a mild case of COVID. And while I was recuperating, I was reinvigorated, realizing that it's so important for women to understand the sacredness of their bodies in their lives and how significant our lives are. Our awareness of our divinity is so significant. Living in the center of your power as a divine spiritual being is essential in our evolution as a human species. It's when we are living and breathing and having our being in the center of our power that we can shift the systems, the patriarchal and colonial systems that have kept us bound, because that binding is directly related to our vaginas. And I know you're saying, what do you mean? And what I mean is there has been a systematic process that has been utilized in order to gain control of the earth and control of women. Because if women are in control, then entire cultures are controlled. And what do I mean when I say that? Last month, I did a short video sharing my thoughts about the Supreme Court and the reversal of the Roe versus Wade law. All of a sudden, it all just intuitively was downloaded, and I just was aware of the correlation between the power that feeds the patriarchy and the power of the woman's body and vagina. Let me go into it. I've been reading over the years, and there are several books that help to clarify this whole concept. So one of the books I think I may have mentioned to you that I read was When God Was a Woman, which is by Merlin Stone. And what she does is she goes into different religious communities and talks about women as divine spiritual leaders. And she talks about different cultures. And she talks about African culture and European cultures and pagan religions. And I have to say that when I first started to look at that book, I couldn't really receive the whole notion of a pagan religion because I was so entrenched in Christianity. I wanted so much to accept the religion that I was raised in, and I had traveled. I mean, I didn't necessarily traveled, but I had read, I'd taken courses in graduate schools, thought of becoming a minister, and just couldn't do it. But I still wanted to be a part of Christianity because that's what I was raised in, and it's familiar. Then one year, probably 2020, I had this immediate epiphany, just this knowing that the Bible actually is recounting the decimation of matrilineal spiritual communities. In Merlin Stone's book, When God Was a Woman, she talks some about the wars and some about, women and what they were doing, some of the powers that they had. One of the things that was really key for me and is related to this premise that controlling the vagina helps to feed the patriarchy. At one point, especially in like the Middle East, and when I'm speaking of the Middle East, I'm actually relating another book that I read by Mama Zogbe. Her book is called Mami Wata, and I'll include all of the books in the show notes. In her book, she's talking about the priestesshood that existed in Ethiopia, Egypt, and Libya. That those were the main areas where the matrilineal spiritual communities were vibrant during the time before the birth of Jesus the Christ. So in her book, she says that Aryans and the priests of Ammon wanted to share the lucrative trade routes that were established under the matriarchal temples in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Libya. After the invasion of the priests of Ammon, there were more invasions by other men, by the Assyrians, then the Greeks, later the Persians, the Turks, the Romans. The invasion included raping the priestesses. And it also included the priests inserting themselves into leadership over the priestesses. So you have all of these women and all this spiritual power, and you have this one man who is like at the center of it. And so one of the things that the priests realize is that if they can get into all the energy of the women, that they can harness that energy and use it for their own power. I was watching a documentary on Netflix, and it's called Keep Sweet. It's about the fundamentalist Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints group. The men in that group who have multiple wives call themselves priests. They call themselves priests, and, maybe they're utilizing some of the same tactics that the priests of Ammon that I mentioned used. So maybe they remember the practices. The priests have multiple wives, maybe 20 to 30 wives. They get the girls when they're young, just starting puberty, and then they indoctrinate them, have sex with them, and indoctrinate them, and tell them to always believe, to keep sweet, to be positive, to share positive energy, to be loving and nurturing of their mate, their husband. And so you have all of this feminine energy moving toward this one man. So there are great things that can be done when you have the power of women, and then especially the power and the innocence of young people, of young women. So to me, it's all related. One of the reasons why the priests defiled the priestesses is because they wanted to control, again, the priestesshood and the trade routes, and they knew that having sex with women, with the priestesses, would throw them off their square, for lack of a better word, would make them feel defiled because they were defiled. And they were hoping to take the power of the vagina. And I think in some cases they really did. And they actually had these spiritual women who were, who had saved themselves for spiritual purposes. In her book, The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception, Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception by Marguerite Mary Rigoloso, PhD, she talks about the fact that, well, her premise is that Mary, the mother of Jesus the Christ, was actually a priestess from a long line of priestesses who were trained in immaculate conception and getting pregnant without actually having a sperm. And these are three different books that are talking about how women who were spiritual leaders became defiled through having sex with men who hated or who wanted the power that the women controlled. I don't want to say they hated them, but, things change. There was a time when matrilineal societies were the norm, and men moved to a time where matrilineal societies are the norm, and that's where we are now. And that's why it's so important for those who are in support of the patriarchy to be able to control birth. They need to be able to control when babies are born and birth, because that's really life. That's how life happens. And at one point, like I mentioned, women passed property on to their children. So mothers passed on property to daughters. And so sometimes men weren't able to inherit because land was transferred in some cultures through the female. And if women were to learn that we can actually experience a spiritual union with our Creator, then it would be a whole different thing. Now, Marguerite Rigoloso talks about being able to have intercourse with spirits, and and she goes into it in her book. I'm still kind of wrapping my head around that whole concept, but she says that one of the ways men were able to get control of women and the society is that these discordant spirits would enter into these sacred sexual practices and impregnate the priestesses with their seed. And once that happened more and more and more, then there became more people who supported the patriarchal system of power. It's so important for us to know ourselves, to be able to make a decision for ourselves about what happens to our body. I was just thinking that so much of my life, and maybe other people's lives too, I believe it's probably other people's lives too, but so much of my life has been focused on what men need and want. And when it comes to sex, most of the time I was focused on what the man needed or wanted. In our culture, I would say, I think this documentary said maybe 60% of women have never had an orgasm. So, 80, 85, 90% of men have orgasm in sex, and maybe 50 to 60% of women have an orgasm when they're having sex. So that's a big difference. So many of us are focused on whether or not the man is happy. And how many of you, if you're a woman, how many of you faked it and just acted like it didn't matter whether or not you had an orgasm? The man had his orgasm and he was happy and pleased, and you just like laid next to him adoringly, trying not to be angry, because if you got angry that you didn't get yours, then that would create all this conflict, and the man's ego would have been damaged, and it's just like it can be a whole big mess. Now, for those of you who are having these wonderful relationships with men, women, or whoever you engage with, and you're having pleasure and orgasm, that's a wonderful thing. It's also possible, and I know that you probably already know this if you're listening, it's also possible to enjoy intercourse or satisfaction, sexual vaginal satisfaction, in a way that does not include having sex with anybody, any person, male, female, whatever. And it's not about masturbating to mimic sex. So all of this got us caught up in how men want to define sex. So if the vagina was used as a sacred conduit, women were engaged in immaculate conception, and there were different types of priestesses. The tantric priestesses, have their own role, and then the priestesses of Marguerite Rogolosso's book had a particular mission. The point is, there were many cultures where women understood that their vagina is a sacred conduit. It can be used for pleasure and to have sex and to give babies, to have babies, but it can also be used to connect to the Creator. And that's what I think is like the most important thing for me to mention. And I don't even know why I'm even mentioning sex and talking about sex so much, because it's not like I'm like a really sexual person. I guess it's because I need to understand that my vagina, your vagina, my vagina, if you have a vagina, is designed to connect us to the loving presence of our Creator. And other things added on to that. So if we knew that and we decided what we wanted to do with our bodies, we decided maybe we don't want to have babies. That's what I decided. I decided, I don't want to have a baby. I believe that if I had a baby, that I would have created this karmic connection that would have taken generations and generations to break free of. I believe in my family, in my mother's family, there are many women who don't have children. And I think I may have mentioned this before. I'm not sure. Anyway, so in my mother's family, her mother was the only one of five. Her mother, and so there were five sisters. My mother's and my grandmother's family, there were five sisters. Only two of them had children, so three did not. In my mother's family, my mother's mother was one of the ones who had children. She had 5 daughters. Of the 5 daughters, 4 daughters were born, and that's in my generation. Only one of us has children. So I don't believe I was supposed to have children. I believe that karmically it would have perpetuated the system of not feeling loved or accepted, and all the things that become that were part of my life, and that really were infused into people from the colonialist patriarchal system. And some of us got different pieces and transferred different pieces on to our communities. So the point is, we have the ability to control our vaginas, and it's not just about whether or not you have children. It's not just about whether or not you have children. If you want to learn more about what you can do and how to have an actual connection to your creator through your yoni, then look at my course. It's called For Earth and Soul, and it's belly dance and spiritual embodiment. So thanks so much for listening, and like, subscribe, share, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Peace. Thank you so much for joining me for In the Center of Her Power podcast. I sincerely hope that you were fed with divine feminine soul food. Please like or subscribe or share the podcast. And until next time, shine.